All right, now we begin to talk about some of the uses that you will find for a subjunctive when the subjunctive verb is actually the main verb. Previous to now, all of these clauses, 1 through 18 that we have seen, are subordinate clauses, which means that they require subordinating words, whether that would be a cum or an ut or qui quae quod or questiony word. They all, or dumodo, provided that, quin, that, dum donec or quoad, they all then are subordinate. But now we have these four uses that are not subordinate. Now, as per usual, I'm going to make it to where I embed within this quiz or this overview three things, and by simply knowing these three things, you can then take a Canvas quiz and earn a free, we'll make it 110 this time. And they're going to be three teachers at Eastside that I admire and think do a great job, and I'm appreciative that they are my fellow coworkers. So let's go ahead and begin and keep an eye out for those teachers as I name them as we go through. So, subjunctives as the verb of independent or main clauses. The very first one that we encounter, I would argue, is the most popular and the most common use, and it is called the jussive or hortatory. Don't worry about the two different names. It's just that it's called jussive when the verb is not first person. So we have obviously a subject of he, she, it, they, and of course you and y'all. But when it is first person, then the subject is I or we. It is referred to as hortatory. For whatever reason, those are just the terms that it uses. But you will most likely see the present tense subjunctive. Now, it is rather difficult, as I say here, to recognize because you have to, of course, pay attention to the detail of the vowel in the verb form. Most of the time, students are merely reading and looking at definitions when you should not. You don't see the definition first. You should always see the form first, and you should pay attention to what is the conjugation of the verb, and so that then you will be able to know. Now, if you have a subjunctive verb, it's a present subjunctive most likely, and you don't have it in any subordinate clause, and it is the main verb, you will have what is called the jussive. Now, both the word jussive and hortatory come from Latin words. Jussive comes from ubeo, ubere, usi. Hortatory comes from hortor, hortari. And it's essentially when the subjunctive verb is functioning kind of like an imperative. And the translation, as you can see here, would be let the subject verb, let me verb if it's first person, let us verb if it's first person plural, or you could also say may the subject verb. And of course, it is a light version of an imperative. So when you say, let's go to the lunchroom, you're saying essentially to the people, go to the lunchroom. But let us is a lighter way of saying it. And that's what the subjunctive does. Now, let's look at some famous examples. Here we have a couple of lines, both from the Aeneid, the second one, and the first one is, let me fix that again, autocorrect. There we go. From Catullus. Catullus, of course, in poem number 5, vivamus, from the verb vivo, vivere, and it has an A, so we fear a giant liar. And then amo, amare, we fear giant liar. So instead of saying we live, my Lesbia, remember that Lesbia refers to Clodia, and he calls her that because he is quite the fan of Sappho from the island of Lesbos, and so she is indeed a lesbian. Writing, of course, love poetry to a small group of women on that same island, which is where we get the modern term from. But instead of we live and we love, it is let us live and let us love. Let the subject verb and let the subject verb, because we have a independent. If I wanted to, I could have put a period right there. It could stand on its own. Likewise, I could have put a period right here and it stands on its own. And you can just, of course, ignore the vocative male lesbia in this poem that opens up the very first line. He's talking directly to her. Now, a famous line from the Aeneid in Book 1, in which it says, yaktet. Now, this is from the frequentative verb, yakto, yaktare. Remember that frequentative verbs are those verbs made from the fourth principal part of other verbs and imply the action repeated. A great example of this would be spicio, spicere, spexi, spectus, to spot, but you take spectus, the fourth principal part, and turn it into specto, spectare, and it means to spot over and over, which in English is the frequentative action of watching. And so here, it is not just throw, yakio, yakare, but to throw about, meaning to throw repeatedly. But it's yakto, yaktare, we, fair giant liar, and regnare, we, fair giant liar again. So instead of saying that he throws himself, illa aula, in that palace, aula is a palace, and he being Iolus, it would be let Iolus throw himself about in that palace, and let him rule. Regnat with an AT would mean really he rules, but regnet is going to be let him rule. Clauso carcere in the enclosed, perfect passive participle, having been enclosed, prison, wintorm of the winds. And so here we see again the what we call the jussive hortatory, which is by far the most common. All right, let's move on to the second use. And your first teacher that I admire at Eastside is Miss Nixon, Nickson. She, of course, teaches family and consumer sciences, and I think she just does a fantastic job all the way around. I really admire her. She does a wonderful job with her students, always been so wonderful, warm, and personable with me, letting me use her ovens and sink when I need it for the various things I have. I think she's just fantastic. And so if you ever have a chance to say hello to Miss Nixon, you're talking to a great teacher and a wonderful asset at Eastside. So the first teacher, Nixon. Number two, your deliberative subjunctive. The deliberative subjunctive is easy because if you have a direct question that is being asked, and you can tell it by the question mark, and the subjunctive is the verb, then you have a deliberation. And in English, we show deliberation with the word should. So you would have should the subject verb if it's present. If it's perfect, should the subject have verb. If it's pluperfect, should the subject had verbed. But should is the word that you would use. So look at quid faciat, which again is directly from the Aeneid. Facio facere, third io, we fear a giant liar, IA, tells me that what we are dealing with is a subjunctive asking a question. So it's not what does he do or what is he doing. That'd be quid facit that we had in chapter 1 of Ecce Romani. Instead here it is the deliberative. And so we ask, what should he do? Because this is Aeneas deliberating as to what should he do when it comes to telling Dido that he has to leave. Here, also from the Aeneid, book 2, when Aeneas gets very angry at Helen, Troya arceret, which is from ardeo ardere arsi, which means to, of course, burn. It is a perfect subjunctive with a perfect stem and a perfect subjunctive ending. Let's go ahead while we're at it and get rid of all of those spelling issues. It thinks that it doesn't recognize the Latin. And so it's not did Troy burn, has Troy burned, but should have Troy burned in the fire. And so it is showing a deliberation that we then have. So again, if you have a subjunctive asking a question, it is what we call the deliberative subjunctive because it is showing a deliberation, and that word that we use is should. The third. Now I'm going to also at this time tell you your second teacher, and your second teacher is also down there on VHAL, Miss Pollard. Miss Pollard, a wonderful agriculture teacher, does a fantastic job with the FFA. For a long time in my career at Eastside, over 20 years, the FFA and agriculture position was somewhat of a teacher of the dark arts, like one finds in Harry Potter. There was such turnover there, but Miss Pollard really has brought a stability and a quality to the program overall. I'm quite the fan of FFA, have been since I've been in high school. I grew up on a farm myself, and I find it to be an invaluable part of education for tons of students. I think it really benefits them. I love the FFA. It is after JCL and the academic team, really one of my favorite student organizations. And so Miss Pollard, Pollard, so glad she's at Eastside and really makes our school stronger. And she and her husband over at the Career Academy really make FFA and agricultural education, which is so important, strong in our county. I'm glad to have them. So your third one here is the volative or the optative. Again, just two terms that are derivative of Latin, volo, volare, or volo, vele, what am I saying? That, of course, means to wish or want, and opto, optare, which also means to wish or want. This is the what's called impossible wish. Now, what makes this so easy to recognize? The word utinam. When you see the word utinam, it is an impossible wish. You will have a subjunctive verb, and it will then, of course, be a subjunctive thing that could not happen. Now, you can translate the utinam if only, but if you want to really sound British, you should translate it would that. You could have it as like you are English butler, when, of course, the mean taskmaster of a boss, the fellow who's the master of the house, makes an impossible command of the butler. Move this house right now, Jeeves. And of course, Jeeves says, would that I could, sir. Would that is an expression of, yeah, I can't, if only. And so that is the impossible wish. So easy to recognize because of the utinam, and where we have a couple of examples. I think this one might be from Catullus 64, or it might be from the Aeneid, Book 4. The reason I say that is that because if you read both of them, you can tell that Book 4 of the Aeneid is absolutely derivative of Catullus 64. Catullus 64 is all about Ariadne getting abandoned by Theseus, and Dido being left by Aeneas. It's quite clear that, I don't want to say that Virgil plagiarized, but that one is derivative of the other. So, tetigeset is from tango, tangere, titigi, to touch. It is a pluperfect, and so would that the ships never had touched our shores. In other words, Ariadne is expressing that she wished that she had never even met Theseus, that the Theseus had never arrived. Of course, that's an impossible wish because he did. Same way with Dido, wishing that Aeneas, it's kind of like in a bad breakup, I wish I had never met you. And so that is what we have here. When you say, I wish I had never met you, then that is that impossible wish. In Latin, you would have used utinam. And here, the second one, utinam aeneas non discedat. I think I made this one up myself, but here it is a present subjunctive, discedo, discedere. And, of course, here it is, if only, would that Aeneas not leave, if only Aeneas does not leave. It is an impossible wish, easy to recognize because of the word utinam. Now, the fourth and final of the independent uses of the subjunctive is what we call the potential. This is the one that is the most difficult, I think, to look at. Most likely, it will have an imperfect subjunctive, unlike the jussive or hortatory, which has the present. It can have the present, but it is the one that shows potential. We have this in English all the time, in which whenever we use the word might, I might go to the party tonight, you're using the potential subjunctive. I would help you out tomorrow moving. That's a potential subjunctive. And so here you, of course, are going to be able to see it with the word here, wellem. I would perhaps potentially want. And here it is, dikos, in present tense. Wellem, which is the, of course, imperfect, which has the present infinitive, wola, wele, plus the ending. Here is the second one, dikos, a present subjunctive. We fear a giant liar. And so you use the word would, and again, might. I would want. And then here we have an ut substantive noun clause, the act of you coming to Rome, that you come to Rome. This directly comes from a Catullus poem in which Catullus is writing to his friend, wanting his friend to come and visit him. Potentially, I would want, and what is that thing? Not candy, not money, but an action, that you come to Rome. But this is your potential subjunctive. And secondly, you might say, and then here we have an indirect statement, which has a accusative subject, infinitive verb. You might say that, there's no word for that for the indirect statement, that he is, esse, a bonum hominem, a good man, and thus that is the potential subjunctive. The third teacher that I'm going to randomly select as that I appreciate and respect and think that really does a great job is Mr. Singleton. Singleton, the chorus teacher, and of course the girls soccer coach. Again, just like the ag position at Eastside for a long time, there was such turnover on a yearly basis of the chorus position, and then finally he came in almost a decade ago or so, maybe more, and really stabilized it, and has done a fantastic job, and is just such a great chorus instructor, and a great, fantastic coach as well of soccer. And so Singleton, Singleton, fantastic, again, always so nice and warm when I greet him, and I really respect and appreciate all three of those teachers. So if you go ahead and go onto Canvas and put them in, you will receive a free 110, I think I promised you. So good luck with that. I appreciate you listening to this. It wasn't too long, but those are the ways in which one finds the subjunctive when it is the main verb. You have the jussive hortatory, let the subject verb. You have the deliberative, asking a question, should. You have the impossible wish, utinam, would that, and then finally the potential, I would imperfectly want, or the subject might presently. And thus, those are the three. So, thanks so much for listening. Hopefully, you are a little bit more on top of the subjunctives as independents, and I appreciate you again listening and watching.